Shalom. Did you know that in the ancient world, having a meal between one another represented covenant? Did you know that once you make an oath and you recognize that there are other gods greater than yours, and you bring a sacrifice and you eat at the threshold of that temple, you are coming into a relationship with the God that you brought the sacrifice to? All of these are the elements of the ancient Near Eastern culture in regards to covenantal oath and covenantal relationships. Now, let's look at that in this week's Torah Portion Yithro, and we'll look at it in Exodus chapters 18, verse 10 to 12. Listen to the language. It's really fascinating. It says, "And Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and who has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that Adonai is greater than all the gods, for in the very thing in which they behave proudly, he was above them all." Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and sacrifices to Elohim, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law, before Elohim. Now, this is a very, very telling type of verses that sometimes we are overlooking, because to us, it was just an encounter of a father-in-law and a son-in-law. But in reality, the language that Jethro utilized is recognizing the authority and the sovereignty of the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So thus, everything that happened in Egypt was for the purpose of restoring the honor and the promises that God gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then delivering them out of Egypt. Now, you have to recognize that something big had to happen in order for Jethro to abandon all the gods that he served and recognize that there's only one and there's no one else. So what really happened? You know, as we see the encounter of Moses and Pharaoh, in regards, Pharaoh doesn't know the God of Israel, but yet, you know, the Creator revealed himself in the only way that the Egyptians would have really known that the God of Israel is greater and most powerful than anybody else, is by defeating the gods of Egypt. The whole mythology, the whole worship, the whole mindset of the ancient world, you can really see how systematically the Elohim of Israel, he began to eliminate every god of the Egyptians, even defeating the sea by crossing through the Red Sea, thus showing that the power, the honor, and the sovereignty of the heavens and the earth belongs to the Elohim of the Israelites. And that's why when the Israelites crossed the Jordan, what did they say? They sing a song and they say, Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. Who is like you amongst the gods? There's none like you. They all recognize that there's only one sovereign, all-powerful, almighty king, who is the King of Israel, and reveal himself in a mighty strong way. So, what are the elements that we see here from a covenantal relationship? Just like Passover. Passover is a covenantal meal, right? That's why in the Bible, in the book of Exodus says that only those who are circumcised should take of the Passover. Why? Because the Passover is a high level of holiness. No one who's not in covenant should not take of the Passover, because it brings that person into a high level of Kedusha. So eating of that meal, and you are not in covenantal relationship, you are encroaching on the holy, on the sancta. And that's very, very important. The sancta, the houses, becomes holy unto the Lord, just like the tabernacle was holy unto the Lord. All right, so when you have Jethro recognizing the power of the Elohim of Israel, and then bringing a sacrifice, like it says right there, to the tabernacle, he's making a meal. He's making a covenant at the threshold. And then Aaron and Moses' father-in-law, they all have a meal together with the elders, recognizing that he is now part of the kingdom. When he chooses to go back to his own country, we don't know much about Jethro after this, but we do know, however, that if in the ancient world they were so faithful about their oath and their covenantal relationship and duties, we know that he must have been faithful to the Elohim of Israel forever. Because once you make an oath in the ancient world, you have to live by it. And the curses and blessings of Deuteronomy 28 also apply to him as well. Now, remember that to Jethro, because he offered a sacrifice and he admitted that there's only the God of Israel. So he made a confession, he brought a sacrifice, and he ate a meal. Okay, that's very important in the ancient elements of a covenantal relationship. Thus, that meant that Jethro became a client of the God of Israel, just like Israel, Mount Sinai. You know, one of the things we need to remember when we look into covenants is the fact that what happened on Mount Sinai is very significant for Israel, very significant for anyone who wants to serve the God of Israel. Anyone who wants to follow Yeshua as the Messiah of Israel, sent by the Elohim of Israel, must understand that it's not just confessing Yeshua to be your master and you become his client, but also believing that Elohim raised him from the dead. To do what? To walk in lawlessness, or to submit under the commandments that were given on Mount Sinai and all the statutes and the laws. So what we see, a lot of elements that we find in this week's Torah portion points to ancient Near Eastern international treaties. And by the way, they found that the structure of the book of Exodus and also the covenantal relationship of the book of Deuteronomy lines up almost exactly to the terms and requirements of an ancient international treaty. If you compare the Hittite treaty with the Torah, you can see a lot of the legal elements of the structure of a treaty. Thus, what makes the Torah above and beyond, greater and better than any other covenant in the ancient world is the righteousness and the justice, the faithfulness and the kindness and the mercy of our King. So I just want to take the time and share a little bit about the very important little words that you see there that you may not connect as covenantal language. There are 2 verses that lets us know exactly the relationship that Jethro had between Moses and the Elohim of Israel. Jethro now became part of the kingdom of Israel. And that's why when he gave the advice, it was taken. The advice of having leadership. I pray that you enjoyed this little tidbit of Did You Know from Wisdom in Torah Ministries. We'll see you soon. Thank you for joining us. Shalom.